Hi, I'm Andre Braugher. Throughout the recorded history of life on Earth, freedom from the violence and destruction of war and the continuing search for human rights and social justice have eluded us. While the prophets long ago admonished us to beat our swords into plowshares, the dream of peace on earth and goodwill among all peoples has continued to challenge and often frustrate our best intentions and highest aspirations. And yet, in 1945, soon after World War II, the United Nations Conference on International Organization began in San Francisco. In addition to governments and what would later become member states, non-governmental organizations were invited to assist in the drafting of a charter. It was a heroic effort. And on October 24, 1945, thanks in large part to the leadership of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, that charter became a reality and the United Nations was officially formed. 50 years ago, inspired by the United Nations and its ambitious charter, Adlai Stevenson II, a Unitarian Universalist who had recently been named ambassador to the United Nations by President John F. Kennedy, contacted Unitarian Universalist President Dana Greeley to urge the establishment of a volunteer envoy system to communicate the values of liberal religion on a global stage. Greeley immediately saw the wisdom of adding our voices to those of other faith traditions, and as a result, the UUA General Assembly adopted its first general resolution on the United Nations. Stevenson urged that the UUA establish an active presence for UUs within New York's international community, and the rest, as they say, is history.
From the beginning, the United Nations Charter read like a Unitarian Universalist wish list, saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war, faith in human rights, equal rights for men, women, and children, justice and freedom. All are present in the Charter. It just made sense that a relatively small denomination like ours should seize the opportunity to make our voices heard in what most of us think of as the last best hope for living together with tolerance, protecting our planet, and maintaining peace and security for all people. It's never easy, but the alternatives are just not acceptable. We needed to be present. We needed to be heard.
Apart from the Roosevelts, Adlai Stevenson, and Dana Greeley, I credit Reverend Homer Jack and Elizabeth Swayze, who worked together to coordinate our advocacy with the U.S. government in Washington, D.C., and at the United Nations here in New York. We were first located at Community Church in Manhattan, and later at the UN Church Center on UN Plaza, where we continue to operate today. The UUA Office of Social Responsibility used these offices to promote world peace, human rights, disarmament, health, and social issues on very meager budgets. We continue to do more with less, to speak out on the tough issues like HIV/AIDS, the rights of women, sexual orientation and gender identity human rights, freedom of choice, reproductive health, and hunger and climate change. We speak truth to power in ways to get them to listen.
Even though the United Nations is headquartered in New York City, it is a truly international body, as is our UUNO. Over the past 50 years, Canadian Unitarian Universalists have played key roles in the establishment and in some of the most significant achievements of our United Nations office. We were among the first representatives to the UN Economic and Social Council. We were privileged to be in Rome to help pull together the provisions of the Rome Statute regarding protection of women. And we are especially honored to take part in the faith-based caucus led by Elaine Harvey that brought about the International Criminal Court, which prosecutes the most heinous crimes against humanity. Canadians have played a pivotal and outsized role in the United Nations office, and we are particularly proud for all that we have done and all that we have done together.
But in 1969, severe budget problems caused the UUA to have to curtail support for its UN office. The needs had not changed, but without the funds to keep the office open and to pay for a minimal staff and volunteer support, the future looked bleak indeed. Reverend Walter Donald Kring, senior minister of the Unitarian Church of All Souls in New York City, dreaded the thought of losing our presence and our voice in the church center and within the United Nations community itself. He eventually realized that if the office was to be saved, it would need to be reorganized as a separate but affiliated not-for-profit organization. It was time to raise funds and rally a volunteer cadre of support. The Unitarian Universalist United Nations office was about to re-emerge as a small but effective not-for-profit organization with its own board of directors and its own growing pains.
Walter was adamant that there should be a Unitarian presence at the United Nations and that the office that was maintained there should remain open. Now, I think it's important to understand where his motivation came from. He was a chaplain in World War II. He served on an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific. He saw planes shot down. He saw young men die. And peace was very important to him. In addition to that, he was well versed in international cultures, religions, arts, and he, as the stained glass behind me indicates, he was very conscious of interreligious necessity. And his artwork always reflected with the greatest respect the culture of various nations and peoples. So he went to work, he organized, he petitioned, he probably raised a little money, and with the help of a man named Homer Jack, he and Mr. Jack, Reverend Jack, enabled this office to continue. It was important to Walter. He did everything he could. He did it well, and he did it.
Working under severe economic hardship, the office managed to advance its mission in the international community. Hosting annual seminars for Unitarian Universalist youth and adults, speaking out through newsletters, conferences, and an impressive internship program, the United Nations office built a reputation for leadership on issues that others were reluctant to take on. We played a key role in the establishment of the Millennium Development Goals, which were adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2005.
I was hired as executive director in 2008 after serving as a U.S. diplomat with the Department of State for 25 years throughout the world. My UUNO position allowed me to speak out on issues that needed to be addressed. We have a wonderful UN Millennium Development Demonstration project in Ghana called Every Child is Our Child, a program to support AIDS orphans with health care and education in coordination with the Mayakrobo Queen Mothers Association. And we took a strong stand to support Reverend Mark Kiemba in his opposition to the Ugandan Kill the Gays bill. We succeeded against all odds to get sexual orientation and gender identity human rights onto the agenda of the UN NGO Human Rights Conference in Paris to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that was in 2008. Due to our continuing efforts, the UN has gone from apathy on this subject to putting in place personnel, policies, and programs in all of its agencies and becoming a global advocate with regular speeches from the UN Secretary General and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, promoting equal rights regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity. The UUNO's phenomenal success in this area has catapulted it into leadership roles in support of the International Criminal Court, disarmament, peace and security, sustainable development, climate change issues, and all aspects of human rights, including migrant rights, indigenous peoples' rights, women's rights, and more. This is what your office has done and can continue to do with your support.
As chair of the United Nations Office Advisory Board, I had the unique experience of traveling to Ghana with my wife Mary and with UUA leadership to observe the Every Child is Our Child program firsthand. It was a moving experience. To witness the life-saving care and educational support provided by the Queen Mothers Association was truly amazing. While we were there, we met with public health and education officials and with the leaders of UNICEF in Ghana. They all told us the same thing. The Every Child program is a model of sustainable compassion and a true best practice. Mary and I have never been more proud of what our denomination has accomplished and is accomplishing every day in Ghana. This is exactly what the United Nations had envisioned for the Millennium Development Goals, and our United Nations office is leading the way.
In recognition of the UN office's leadership, Knotts was named chair of the United Nations NGO Committee on Human Rights. And in 2012, its 50th anniversary, the UUA Board of Directors, the Canadian Unitarian Council, and the UNO Board of Directors all voted unanimously to merge the United Nations office back to its home within the UUA. After 50 years of advocacy and service, our UN office homecoming was the best anniversary gift that any of us could imagine.
It just didn't make sense to have our international voice in New York as a separate organization. The time was right for all of us to recognize the signal contributions being made on our behalf on the world stage. I think we all saw a continuing need for global witness in a world torn by strife, riddled by inequality, and calling all of us to speak out for peace and social justice. I think we can all be proud of what we've accomplished, but our United Nations office continues to need both financial and volunteer support if we're not merely going to survive, but prevail. Even though now it's an integral part of the UUA, our United Nations office continues to need the direct support of UUs everywhere. Gifts designated for our United Nations office will be put to work to amplify our voices and protect the issues that all of us care about. It's a great investment in world peace, human rights, and social justice.
So it's a truly happy and hopeful 50th anniversary, but let it also be a renewal of our commitment to the dream of world peace and to our best hopes for a better life for all. Even though we may be few in numbers, we've proven that the courage of our convictions, the passion we share for our issues, and the compassion we have for the plight of others can make a difference, a world of difference, in a world that needs us now more than ever.